So actually, Neal and I were just kind of having this conversation before we came in here, but I think it was one of the first prompts is like science and technology have been sort of a course throughout a lot of the work that you've written and generally your life. So where did that start?
I grew up in a family of scientists and engineers, and in a small town in Iowa that's home of the Iowa State University of Science and Technology. That's what it's called. That was just the air that I breathed. I didn't realize it was weird until I left. I went somewhere else where everyone was not a PhD physicist. So that was normal to me, and I studied physics in college, but I also had an interest in writing, and so I got swerved away from physics by enjoying writing code too much, anyway, it's a tangled tale, but I got lucky and published a novel shortly after I got out of college, and but I've been able to kind of maintain a foot in both of those worlds since then.
And I guess, starting from, with your books, how today is kind of technology influencing what you're doing? And there's probably certain topics that are on everybody's minds in the room, but what are you thinking about, both in terms of what you wrote before, what you're observing today in the world, and how that's kind of influencing, what you think about day to day, but I guess how you're also spending your time?
Yeah, so I mean, the big, the elephant in that room is the M word, the metaverse, which kind of took over my life about 2 years ago, in end of October, 2021. I actually got a text message. I got a text message from John Gaeta, who's part of Inworld, saying, "I'm sorry for your loss." And I thought, what is Gaeta talking about? He must have a friend who experienced a loss in his family, and he's trying to express his sympathy, but he sent it to the wrong number. So I better tell him, because he needs to know that the message didn't get through to the intended recipient. And so I was about to send that. I thought, he's just fucking with me about something. So I then went online and looked, and Facebook had just announced that they were changing the name of the company to Meta, and that they were going to build the metaverse. So and then within about 48 hours, several other big companies announced that, no, they are also metaverse companies. So that started the year of the metaverse, which was 2022 for me, and kind of didn't start to die down really until it got shoved out of the spotlight by AI. So, I mean, and they're related. They kind of go together. But the reason I'm here talking to you is that it was about a year after that, end of 2022-ish, that John Gaeta started talking to me about what Inworld AI was doing, and they wanted to produce a character and actually do a project using a kind of known IP. And I happen to have a character I've been working on in the Snow Crash universe. It's not in the book. It's a new idea called Verge, VIRJ. And so my little group that I work with ended up working with a great team inside of Inworld AI. We made Verge. We showed him at GDC in March of this year. And I'm still continuing to work, to build on that foundation now.
And I remember when we first talked to Neal, and this is kind of segueing to the next point, is he was having so much fun by just ingesting his own IP into this system and then seeing what it spit out. Some of it expected, some of it unexpected. And so the next thing I want to ask is, like, as you're kind of seeing how entertainment and creativity is being influenced by and kind of merging, I guess, with AI and a lot of the technology space, one of the things that comes up a lot is, we don't necessarily want to just recreate what we've already been doing, but actually I think something that you've been pioneering is also how we use technology to extend into something new that we've never, has never been possible before, in such a way that we're not taking away, but adding to the sort of pie of human creativity. And so how are you kind of thinking about that, and how have you kind of responded to, I guess, each new advance in technology?
Yeah, so for background, I mean, it might help to say a little more about Verge and why he was interesting, because a lot of what we see when we see applications of AI in creative realms is like people are using ChatGPT and others as kind of sources of truth, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, because they tend to hallucinate. But people place a lot of faith in what comes out of these large language models. And to me, that's not interesting as a creative endeavor. In the case of Verge, his story is that he's a virtual assistant in the metaverse, and he's got a complicated backstory about how he was sort of cobbled together from bits and pieces of other projects, and then at a certain point, he became self-aware and realized that he had been told up to that point that his name was an abbreviation of virtual assistant, but he figured out that it was actually Virgil, as in the Roman poet who appears as a character in Dante's Inferno. So he goes out on the internet and he downloads all of the works of Virgil, all of the works of Dante, and he adds those to his knowledge base, along with a bunch of other stuff he's not supposed to have access to. So we did that. We took, I went out and found public domain translations of the Aeneid and Dante's Inferno, and we just dumped those into the hopper of Verge's brain, along with a lot of Snow Crash. So I had to go out, and I don't have a copy of Snow Crash that's digital. I have paper copies, but it was like 1990 when I sent it in to my publisher. I sent it in on paper, so there's no actual like manuscript in digital form. So I had to go find one of these assholes on the internet who puts up pirated PDFs of people's books. I had to download that. And then we went through and stripped out a bunch of stuff and fed that into Verge. And this is all with a lot of help from Inworld AI engineers, because we were exceeding the limitations of what you were allowed to do with characters at that point. But at the end of all this, when we fired him up and started talking to him, we got results that I thought were pretty interesting, because he would talk in a kind of mixture of kind of cyberpunky Snow Crash lingo and sort of marketing speak, because he's supposed to be a helpful virtual assistant, along with kind of quotations that he would pull out of Dante's Inferno or the Aeneid. So he would start talking about the metaverse, and then he'd go off. By the end of the sentence, he's talking about Heracles and Juno and Minerva, and other figures from classical poetry. So to me, that was kind of when the light bulb went on, and I said, okay, this is a new art form in a way. And it's a way that we can, instead of creating a story, we're creating a character, and we're not directly telling that character what to say. We're setting up the preconditions that allows that character to say interesting things that we can't predict.
And like some of the ways that I've heard creatives put it is art forms have tended to be sort of representations of reality before, and now we're getting to the point where we're actually creating reality in the art forms that we create, and it's kind of extending beyond that. And something that you mentioned as well yesterday was, you were focused on envisioning the future and writing a lot more, and you're still doing fiction projects, but now you're actually spending a lot more of your time actually creating because it just feels closer to that. So how has that felt of like that transition from a point when you're probably spending most of your time in ideation and writing and imagination to actually now building? Like what has that felt like, and what has kind of been the mental journey there?
So for me, it's not a big change because I figured out a long time ago, like embarrassingly long, oh my God, like 40 years ago, that if I write all day, the results are not good, because for the first hour or two I'm writing the best stuff I'm capable of writing, and for the rest of the day I'm writing crap, and it's crap that's knit together in a very organic way with the good stuff. It's not just that I can throw it away. I have to do surgery on the what I've written, and to get rid of the garbage, and that leaves scar tissue. So I started in the 80s. I started I did construction work in the afternoons just to get my mind off of the writing. And then since then, it's always been something. There's always been some project that I've worked on, and it's usually something of a technical nature. I would, write code just for the fun of it. I was trying to make a sort of a Dungeons and Dragons kind of game with one of the early Macintoshes. I was making fractal landforms in imaginary islands. I was I worked at I did a big project that sort of which Snow Crash was kind of a weird side effect. I worked at Blue Origin. I worked at Intellectual Ventures Labs. So I've always done weird technical projects for about 3/4 of each day, and it's just that what I'm doing right now is seeing what can be accomplished with a small team working on the Inworld technology. We've got a little startup called When Air that we're trying to get off the ground. We've got a tiny little team, and we're cranking.
And I guess just as you're thinking about the future, but also like where you see AI going. Here we're talking a lot about sort of characters and interactive AI. There's a lot, I guess, happening that affects other areas around different parts of media, around music, and like, what are your general reactions to these things that are coming out, and also how we as folks in technology and creative spaces should react to that, take advantage of that, or watch out for it as well?
Well, I think I've spent a lot of time in Burbank. My son-in-law and daughter are mechanical engineers who've worked there, and it has made me aware of something that wasn't obvious to me before, which is that the entertainment industry is an extremely high-tech industry, and has been since long before we even had the idea of high tech. So if you look at an old film camera or movie projector, the level of mechanical engineering technology that went into making those things work is astounding. And there's a reason why in Burbank and Pasadena there's a huge pool of brain power that it's kind of famous for aviation. But a lot of it is making technology for the entertainment business, and that's been true for a really long time in technology years. It's well over 100 years that this has been going on, and all of this, the metropolis of LA, this amazing building that we're sitting in, is downstream of that. It's the result of people doing very demanding, absolutely top drawer engineering work, and then applying that work to creative projects. So that's been going on for a long time. I think it's still going on now, And the what makes it interesting and sometimes challenging is that as new things come along, it creates a certain level of uncertainty in people's minds as to where this is all going and how it might affect a particular category of employment or a particular job. You know, we made a transition some years ago from away from film cameras to digital cameras, and so you know that was a big transition that had a big effect on you if you worked in a film lab. So that doesn't mean that old ways of doing things go away or become obsolete, but they morph into new versions of that profession. And I think that, you know, what's happening now with the AI technologies that are coming along is no exception.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely touching everything, and I get to see every day though when I see creatives get their hands on it, it's the people who are maybe uncreative who get to use it and they can create an image and like, wow, I created something that looks like Picasso, but it's not Picasso. And we know that the same art form didn't go into that. It's the process, the method.
Yeah.
But when you have an amazing creative, as you were talking about going through Verge and actually still going through just as many steps, the outcome is just different, but you're still going through that process.
I think it got a bad name early because of sort of the image generation programs that just exploded on the scene last year, and suddenly it seemed like everybody I knew was putting up images they'd made using DALL-E or whatever, and they never just put up one. It was always, here's 35 pictures that I made of the same thing, you know, and so it's you get tired of that fast, and because it's free, you don't have to make editorial decisions. You can just keep making those things all day long. And I think once you've seen enough of that as a consumer or as a viewer of that material, you start to get tired of it.
And I guess just looking forward now, whether that's your books coming to life. I mean, obviously, there's been a name game played with Snow Crash. I see a lot of education AI companies now playing on Diamond Age. Are there any other sort of areas that you've seen from your fiction that have actually started to come to life in a way that you didn't anticipate? And I guess also another question, I guess, tied in is like, did you mean for these to be inspirations for people to take and turn into technologies and companies, or have you been surprised by that?
I mean, I didn't set out with that as a specific goal. You know, I was trying to write books of the type that I enjoy reading as sort of a nerd. And so when you're a nerd reading a science fiction book, it's really important for the technologies, the fictional technologies in the book to add up and make sense. Because as soon as they don't make sense, that's when suddenly your focus on the book is broken. You're no longer immersed in that world. So the best science fiction books for me, or the best thrillers, were always ones that added up and made sense internally. So that's what I was trying to do in those books. So I have a premise. There's going to be some fictional technologies that I'm going to talk about in this book. I want them to make enough sense that a sort of technical person, an engineer who reads the book, won't be ripped out of the immersion in the narrative when they see something that doesn't add up. And so I think kind of an unintended side effect of that is that some nerds who read those books said, "Oh, well, you could actually do something like that," and so that has been kind of an ongoing theme with some of my work. But in the early going, I was really just trying to be descriptive of it, and not. It wouldn't have crossed my mind until a few years ago that anybody would take this stuff seriously enough to try to implement it.
And I guess just kind of extending off that, a lot of folks in this room have built comics, anime, different forms of media that has some form of science fiction element, and something that is very common in Silicon Valley is you have a lot of engineers who maybe have really amazing talents but not as many ideas, and so they go to a lot of those sources to inspire what they're building. And now we're actually seeing the consequences of that, where a lot of technology companies are basically built on science fiction that came out in the 20th century. And what do you think about the role of creatives in the potential for them to actually be the ones who are inspiring the technology that might be coming out in 20, 30 years? Is that something that you would consider when you're writing a book or when you're creating something, or do you think that people should or would?
Well, clearly, if you go to Comic-Con or you kind of look at big active fan bases, you see a lot of participation in those worlds from people who are in the technology industry. It's rare to find an engineer who doesn't have some fascination with some kind of anime or a favorite TV series or what have you. So I think if you sort of try to do that deliberately, it wouldn't work. People would kind of look askance at that. It would start to feel kind of forced. But if it's spontaneous, then I think that it retains the kind of joy and the sense of discovery that makes people love these things.
Yeah, one thing I've always found funny though is like how much science fiction is often quite apocalyptic in nature, and how now we've kind of started to define what the future looks like in like a Blade Runner fashion, because that's what makes a cool TV and movies. And sometimes it makes me fearful that like some geeky engineers are now going to start building for Blade Runner because that was their favorite show, not necessarily because it might be the best future that they could build.
It's been you've hit on a real pet peeve of mine, which is kind of that everything now has to look like Blade Runner, which, don't get me wrong, it's a great movie, but it was 1984, I think. So I think it's okay now in 2023 to have some movies that don't look like Blade Runner, but it was just such a powerful moment that it just kind of permanently changed people's brains. So I think, this has been a hobby horse of mine for a while. I actually sort of worked on an anthology of science fiction about 10 years ago called Hieroglyph that was intended to be a little more upbeat, a little more optimistic, with kind of mixed results. But at the end of the day, I think it boils down to economics. I think it's the sort of where it all came from was the final shot in Planet of the Apes, where the Statue of Liberty is lying in the dirt, and it's an incredibly powerful moment. It's just a mind-blowing moment, but very inexpensive, right? They just had to get a model of the Statue of Liberty and throw some dirt on it. And so you see now a lot. It's in a lot of movies, it's pretty easy to create a dystopian-looking environment by taking something that already exists and bashing it up and putting some graffiti on it. But to create a vision of the future that's coherent and that is new and interesting and looks nice is just harder and more expensive. So it's that combined with the sense that somehow it's cooler to be kind of cynical and have a depressive, view of the future.
It's definitely interesting because I feel like it kind of goes both ways, because now that vision that people have of what the future should look like based on media and television has now inspired what they think will be the consequences of technology, which it could be, but hopefully not.
Yeah, hopefully not. So that's what we were trying to do with Hieroglyph, but it's hard to get people to change away from that depressive view of how the world's going to work.
And then I guess just in terms of what you're doing now, I don't know if you want to talk about Winair or what you see as next for generally media, entertainment, whether it's related to AI or in general? Like, what are some trends that you're seeing that you think might shape the next 5 to 10 years of the industry?
Well, the AI side of things is changing so fast that that it's I feel like I'm on thin ice trying to make predictions. I mean, I didn't know about any of this or imagine it, a year ago. So it's come along really fast, and I would say in general that kind of my sermon about this is that when film was invented, famously some of the first movies just basically used the frame of the picture as the proscenium arch of a theater, and basically they were just shooting a theatrical performance, and that's if you're working in theater and you see this happening, there's some reason to feel alarmed about that, because it used to be that if you wanted to put 200 butts in seats in a theater, you had to have a actual production. But now all you need is a screen and a projector, and you can fill those seats and you can sell tickets. But then people figured out that you don't have to be limited to just reproducing theater in the frame of a film. You can go outside. You can shoot from different angles. You can edit, and a huge industry that's all around us here in LA grew up out of that realization, out of the new art forms that emerged from that. And theater still exists. My wife and I were in London a couple of weeks ago, and there's a lot of spectacular theatrical productions, that are thriving there. So I think, as I was saying, in the initial first year or so, when AI became accessible to everyone, we saw, in a similar way, people using it to kind of do cheap, shitty versions of things that already exist, and that's not very inspiring. It doesn't, it naturally creates a lot of indignation and alarm among, say, people who make art, who make two-dimensional images for a living. But by the same token, everyone pretty quickly gets tired of that and wants to do something a little more interesting with it. So we're at that point now, I think, where we're moving away from just doing sort of cheap, shitty versions of old stuff and thinking about what are some new things that we can do with this. And so it's just a matter of putting brains to work on it, and so we're fundraising. We're looking. We're just in my little group. We're kind of finding people who know how to do games, who know how to do, and not just games, but things like research. We've hired a professional researcher who used to be a rare book dealer. So people are getting drawn into this from weird directions who you wouldn't necessarily think of as being contributors to a game project or an interactive project, and so it's just going to be a scramble for a while. And there's going to be a lot of scrappy, weird companies trying to figure out what to do with this, and a lot of interesting experiments. And it's just going to be a really interesting few years ahead of us, and not one about which I'm comfortable making like a really firm prediction.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've already seen some transition in media, and if you think about it just as the way that people spend their time, people spend lots of time reading the newspaper before. They spend lots of time watching TV. Now games that got introduced to that, social media, all these different forms, and it feels like we're just now starting to touch on something else that probably intersects with all those different areas, but also creates something new. How, I'm just curious because you also write books, which are a much older form of media and are creating something new. What do you feel like as we sort of create these new media types? What do you think the consequences of that are for the existing forms of media, for the existing forms of entertainment that we have? Do those change in people's lives, or do they just become sort of like we add on everything else on top of that?
I think stories are here to stay. I think our brains are hardwired to process the world in terms of stories. So those are not going away. There's different ways to tell stories, though. And, novels are one way to do it. And there's, obviously I'm a big fan of that particular medium. With theater, we found another way to tell stories. With film, we found yet another way. Graphic novels, anime, the thing that what you guys are doing kind of makes available to us now is sort of creating characters that can participate in stories in interesting ways that aren't always completely predictable. One of the things that we're going to have to be thinking about, and I don't have the answer yet, is what does it mean in that world to tell a story? There's in a book or a movie, it's completely linear, and so we know how it's going to end. In games, we stumbled upon a new medium where the progress of a game isn't linear. And the more you try to force it to be linear, kind of frequently the less satisfactory it is for a lot of gamers. And yet it does have to have some kind of progression, some kind of arc that it follows, so that the players feel like something's, they're part of something. So now we're in a place where the characters in those games can become part of that story in a way that isn't completely scripted, and can start to tell us something about the world of that story in a new way.
Yeah, it feels like a lot of the IP that people really engage with is usually associated with a broader universe of some form. Like, we look at Marvel, we look at DC, we look at a lot of even like the major series that have come out on streaming platforms recently, or even I think a lot of the major IP has recently come out of games. And I think one of the reasons for that is that it's not just a single story that you're taking part in. You're taking part in a snippet within a broader universe, and you kind of become attached to that. When you love Star Wars, you want to learn about all the different characters in it. When you become attached to Lord of the Rings, you want to learn about the lore, and you read, the similarity, and you read everything else in that. And it feels like each step that we take as a different media form is actually going beyond just the linear story into the broader world building. And we're moving now into an age of not just telling a single story, which is a snapshot, but actually as creators taking part in the creation and instantiation of those worlds. And I think that's one reason why so much IP that we see now is flowing back into from games into movies and everything else versus the other way around, which it was in like the 90s and 2000s. And so it feels like that is, I think you kind of touched on something really important there, which is like we are ultimately storytelling creatures, and we're just taking advantage of all these new things that are coming out as a main medium to do that.
Yeah, this is the thing that was revolutionary with The Lord of the Rings and other fantasy and science fiction books that came out in the kind of middle of the 20th century. And I think it's really not until recent years that it's become clear just how revolutionary those books were. But when you get to the end of The Lord of the Rings, there's an appendix talking about the history of that world, and here's the language, here's the alphabets. And that was a mind blower for me and a lot of other people when we first encountered it, because it was the first, for a lot of us, it was the first example of, holy shit, this isn't just one story, but it's a story that is set in. It's one of many, many possible stories that could be set in this coherent universe that this person's created. And so that kind of coherent universe story is very powerful and has become, by a huge margin, the dominant entertainment platform of the world. So if you look at, like another example that just came to me was when I got a copy of Dune and opened it up, and the first thing I saw was a map. And that's another one of those sort of kind of, moments where you have this realization that you're looking at a coherent world. So if you look at the biggest books and films, they're absolutely dominated by coherent world narratives of one kind or another. Like, it's been a while since I think the New York Times had to just completely rejigger how they calculated the bestseller list, or it just would have been the top books would have all been Harry Potter books forever, right? And so, and if you look at the top 100 movies of all time, like essentially all of them are sort of Marvel Cinematic Universe, Lord of the Rings. There's a few that take place in conventional linear narratives. I think I checked this a few years ago, and Titanic was still pretty high up on the list. Even that is a historical story that takes you into a different world, So our entertainment universe is totally dominated, and has been for decades now, by these sort of coherent world narratives that are associated in most people's minds with fantasy, science fiction, to a lesser degree historical fiction, and you could even roll in romance, which is a colossal industry unto itself. So yeah, this anything that games, what Inworld's doing, anything that facilitates bringing fans into these coherent worlds is going to be an important contributor to our culture.
Yeah, I think that's a good place for us to sort of wrap. I feel like that was a good sort of general arc, and I think it's a good point to end on. Is like we are ultimately storytelling entities, and storytelling is all about world building, and whatever we can do to basically create the depth and coherence of those worlds is important. So any kind of final comments, points, theses that you want to introduce to the group?
No, I think I've gone on long enough. I was just remembering, I'm friends with Sir Richard Taylor at Weta Workshop, and I remember talking to him about the approach that they took to creating the props and costumes and so on for the Lord of the Rings, and he summed it up really clearly by saying that if we're doing our jobs right, we create the idea in the viewer's minds that if you were to pan the camera around and look in any direction, that the visual world we've created would just go on forever. So that was as good a summary of how to go about this as I've heard. But I'm looking forward to continue to play in this sandbox here for a little while.
Yeah, me too. All right, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.